Daredevil Season 2 came pretty hot off the heels of the popular first season, and I think a lot of people, myself included, were excited for a second season, especially when we started seeing rumblings of characters like Elektra, an essential part of Daredevil's lore, and Punisher, another especially popular street-level Marvel hero, or anti-hero killer guy, I guess, was being added to the Marvel Netflix series as well as the larger MCU. I skipped Jessica Jones originally, opting to mostly focus my efforts on Daredevil's brand since he was the only one I really had read any comics from of the original lineup. I wound up getting a bunch of the early Frank Miller issues from one place or another, usually like flea markets, and I got an online comic lot with a bunch of these. And since this show seemed to be leaning even more into his stuff, I was excited to see what exactly they'd end up doing. Steven DeKnight, the developer and showrunner of the first season, ended up leaving before season 2, with Doug Petrie and Marco Ramirez taking over in his place, both of whom acted as writers on the first season of the show and thus slid into the role without much turbulence. The end of the first season was originally going to include the Punisher and introduce him to the universe, but Steven DeKnight and the team ended up passing in favor of a more organic introduction in a potential second season, showing that even back when the first season was made, the plan was always to loop over and introduce the Punisher as a major villain, with at times this season being nicknamed by staff during its development, Daredevil vs. Punisher. Again, this season followed the format set forth by Netflix of 13 50-minute episodes, though the lengths are slightly shortened compared to the first season. One benefit of introducing the Punisher in a Netflix show was the ability to do darker things with the character. The MCU proper traditionally has lines that can't be crossed, largely to keep the PG-13 ratings, and perhaps more of the fantastical feel to the films that we often saw in the Avengers films of the day. There are more exceptions, and more recently Marvel has been playing with darker topics and more graphic imagery, but at the time there was a very defined line, and that meant on Netflix, where Disney and the MCU proper could kind of separate themselves from the darker moments of Punisher as a mass murdering psycho guy, caused it to kind of be removed from the fold. So I think the general consensus at the time was that this would give Punisher more freedom than the films could offer, and that's something the showrunners often talked about during the press for this TV season. The plot for the show quickly expanded to also feature Elektra, but the showrunners wanted to hold her off until the time was right in the story so that Frank Castle, the Punisher, could start the show with a spotlight till he was established. Most of the cast returned from the first season, with John Bernthal added on as the Punisher and Elodie Young taking on the role of Elektra. Filming largely took place in New York from mid-2015, wrapping in November of 2015 in time for its March 2016 release. The story follows Kingpin's arrest, with things going pretty well with Nelson and Murdoch, Karen and Matt starting a relationship as well, that is, until Frank Castle, or the Punisher, comes to town to stir up trouble. The Russians, bikers, Irish, and Yakuza are all fighting for Hell's Kitchen as Frank starts massacring the group of them. After a large meeting in the Irish that Frank crashes, killing many of them, Nelson and Murdoch protect a criminal grotto, with Nelson and Murdoch hoping to keep him alive and potentially getting him a favorable sentence for taking down the guy massacring people in Hell's Kitchen, and potentially giving tips on other gangs and stuff, with Daredevil finally confronting the vigilante that has been causing all this trouble, having a debate on the morals of what they do on a rooftop following Daredevil's defeat and capture by the Punisher.
I want to explain that to the orphans and the widows of the men you killed.
That's what you think.
So now, Foggy and Karen are forced to protect Grotto alone as a corrupt district attorney, Samantha Reyes, comes down hard on the duo, eventually tricking Grotto into a sting operation for the Punisher, which goes terribly south. The Punisher manages to kidnap Grotto, who he imprisoned, and forces Matt to choose whether to spare him by killing the Punisher or save him after making him hold Grotto at gunpoint.
If you don't do it, his death's on you. Either way, you're a killer. What kind of choice is that? The kind I make every time I pull the trigger. The kind I'm gonna make right now.
Daredevil manages to break free, but in the confusion, Grotto is killed, while the Dogs of Hell gang starts closing in on them. Punisher was staking them out at the time and finally goes in for the kill, which Daredevil stops, leading to another hallway fight. Anyhow, Matt fights them off but feels guilty about what happened to Grotto, with it making him question his faith and how to treat unarguably bad men. Does he kill them like the Punisher or keep going on his current course? Karen is investigating the Punisher and learns his tragic origin of how he returned from war only to have a gang gun down his family, something the DA was indirectly involved in. Okay, going back a hair. Matt eventually defeats the Punisher and agrees to defend him with Karen and Foggy, but starts getting a little jumpy as his old flame Elektra comes back to town, missing many of Frank's court dates and starting to get pulled out of his life as Matt Murdock in favor of fighting Styx's war with Elektra. Anyways, Matt more or less breaks it off with Karen and even blows off Foggy, who doesn't want anything to do with him and his shenanigans. Styx shows up, and as it turns out, while everything is going down with the Punisher and with Wilson Fisk gone, the Hand are setting up their war with Elektra at the center as the fabled Black Sky, some kind of messiah figure in the organization that will bring the Hand to the forefront. We don't exactly know what it means. We're not exactly told. All this while Frank is in jail getting help from Wilson Fisk to escape custody and get back on the streets. After Wilson Fisk tried to kill him, of course, but also helped him solve a key puzzle in unraveling the murder of his family. Anyhow, Frank is back on the streets again, causing trouble. Karen gets his old sergeant in on it, who's also in on his wife's killing. Frank officially embraces his life as the Punisher. As the Hand war in Hell's Kitchen heats up, he does assist Daredevil and Elektra in fighting Nobu. Remember that guy who got burned to death, seemingly, in the last season? Elektra is killed in the final battle, but Matt fights off the Hand for now. Nelson and Murdock is dead and defunct. Matt is now alone to presumably live his life as Daredevil without friends or even the woman he gave everything up for, Elektra. Foggy took a job with Jerry Hogarth from Jessica Jones in the upper class sector of the law field as a superhero specialist, since they always seem to rotate around him, and Jerry taking a new interest in these people since the events of Jessica Jones, and Karen becoming an investigative journalist, taking over Ben Urich's office after teaming up with his editor for some columns on Punisher, with the whole shebang ending in a cheesy, dramatic speech because, for some reason, these were absolutely required for the Netflix shows.
Look into your own eyes and tell me you are not heroic, that you have not endured or suffered or lost the things you care about most.
A few characters made their MCU debut here, most notably perhaps Frank Castler, the Punisher, a staple of the Marvel Universe really, dipping his toes in virtually every aspect of the Marvel Comics line. The street level, the superhero level, the mystic stuff, cosmic stuff, but obviously we know him as the lone gunman on the street, gunning down criminals, which is more or less his deal here. Frank first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 129 back in 1973. The general broad strokes of his origin are the same. He returns from war, takes out his wife and kids to the park one day, and they happen into gang activity and are killed as collateral damage, which unwittingly awakens the warrior in Frank, who becomes the Punisher to exact revenge not only on the killers of his family, but also any other criminal that manages to cross paths with him. John Bernthal is literally perfect, and it is a pretty accurate take. Punisher is so fucking weird. He canonically meets Archie from the Archie comics, like that's main universe canon. He steals some Avengers gear and becomes whatever this is. Then he becomes Frankenstein. For a while he was War Machine. Punisher has literally done everything, and this is kind of a good and a bad thing. In the comics, he is invented and reinvented constantly. At his roots, though, it's hard to stray too far away from this interpretation of him as just some guy on the street gunning down crooks, because that's what he was made to do. That's his function in the Marvel Universe. Elektra first appeared in Daredevil 168 at a time of great reinvention in the Daredevil line of comics. Frank Miller was writing and drawing the book, and it was probably his most consistent work. and took Daredevil from basically your average Marvel hero but blind and added a new layer with the Hand and of course his second love Elektra, who is now so tied to Daredevil they are hard to really separate. Hell, she is literally Daredevil in the comics these days. She's an important part of his legacy. The general idea was similar, though. In the comics, she returns to Daredevil's life after working with the Kingpin, eventually, very iconically, being killed by Bullseye. In this, she was killed by Nobu, but the idea is pretty much the same. Here, they certainly wanted to tie her more to the Hands than was in the original comics, but regardless, the general vibe is here. She's a villain lady who becomes a hero lady, because her and Matt fall in love, which is when she becomes a hero in her own right, before getting tragically murdered. Blake Tower is an assistant DA pulled from the comics, first appearing in Daredevil 126, and he's more or less similar, a DA bureaucrat causing issues and working directly across from Foggy Nelson as his rival. Ben Donovan is a lawyer for Wilson Fisk in this show. He first appeared in Hero for Hire 14, but in the comics he was actually just sort of an enforcer and villain, not actually the lawyer he is in this show. This is the classic case of taking a name with little to nothing pulled from the comic itself. That's pretty much it, besides a couple very, very minor appearances pulled over. The core additions, of course, being Elektra and Punisher. Matt Murdock, or Daredevil, starts this season with his life kind of at a decent spot. Nelson and Murdock continues to face financial issues, but they're helping people and making an impact with his city, or at least his stomping grounds, at a relative peace following Kingpin's imprisonment. This leads to him moving into a relationship with Karen, and his and Foggy's relationship striking a good balance, but all good things come to an end as Punisher comes to town and starts slaughtering groups of people. Problem is, the general population en masse is siding with Punisher, thinking it's time to take out the trash in a way akin to Charles Bronson's character from all 5 Death Wish movies or the Bruce Willis reboot. Anyhow, this leads, at first, to Daredevil's black and white conversation about where the line is drawn, with this Punisher vigilante perhaps proving that, in a way, his version of justice is more effective than Daredevil's, which is ultimately ineffective. The criminals don't really fear him. Someone always falls into place of the person that gets incarcerated. They eventually end up back on the street, and the cycle continues. After capturing Punisher, he hopes to pick up the pieces of what he learned from Grotto and his death. While Punisher has done terrible things, it is in reflection to terrible things which happened to him, which leads him to want to help Punisher, or at least get his story heard. However, while he survived the Punisher conflict, still set on his morals, it is all recontextualized when Elektra comes to town, a former flame he obsessively helps, even at the cost of his real life as Matt Murdock. With all that is going on with her, and the Hand keeping him occupied, ruining his new relationship with Karen and throwing Nelson and Murdock's strict balance into disarray. Elektra, like Punisher, is also a killer, but Daredevil loves her and hopes to bring her to his views of things, something he does by the end with his war with the Hand, even as Stick betrays her, trying to kill her for being the prophesized Black Sky. Ultimately, Matt picks Daredevil and sticks with his convictions to an extent, though he doesn't stop Frank, even after Punisher defends him with lethal force at the end of the show against the Hand. Matt loses his firm. Karen, Foggy, and Elektra by the end of the show are all pulled away from Matt for one reason or another. And he's down to nothing by the end. His story pretty open for his future adventures, moving into the Defenders crossover show and Daredevil Season 3 after that. Karen Page is a very empathetic person, at first working with Foggy and Matt to help Grotto, and transitioning to Frank after Grotto's death. She is excited to date Matt, but is disappointed as he mysteriously separates himself from her and Foggy. With her and Foggy initially working to try to keep Nelson and Murdoch afloat, but that eventually falls apart, with her taking on Ben Urich's role, a friend from season 1 killed by the Kingpin, as she works with his editor, Mitch Ellison, to solve the Punisher case and find out if he's really pure evil, or if it really had to do with the death of his family.
It's all yours. Start digging.
Are you serious?
I'm very serious.
Mitch still being, perhaps, overly nihilistic, but less cowardly than he was in the first season, where he was willing to basically throw his former reporter friend Ben Urich to the wolves. Newspaper Man and everyone else is suppressing the family murder angle that put Punisher in that position, which kind of frustrates her since she thinks there's more to his story, leaving out that portion of the narrative to make the more clean story of him being a man who is just out to slaughter the mob, as if motivation never mattered at all, which Karen in this season argues is actually the most important part of the Punisher's story. The question proposed here is, does motivation even matter? Karen accompanies Frank, witnessing him kill his former ally, Colonel Ray Shover, the blacksmith,
You stupid son.
which is when he drops Frank, becoming the Punisher fully, and there's no real turning back. However, through all the plights she suffered, she ends up taking over her former ally, Ben's role as a reporter under Mitch Ellison, opening up new adventures for her character and growth as time goes on. Matt does come out as being Daredevil to Karen, and NT's, which I will admit was a really good stinger and setup for their new dynamic moving into season 3, which will surely cause some tension. Foggy is helping Karen and continues to be really tired of Matt's bullshit with superheroing, not knowing exactly what's going on with this whole Elektra thing and not liking it either. I like Foggy in this. He ends up going to Jerry Hogarth's firm at the end, which ties him further into the wider Netflix side of the MCU after the fall of Nelson and Murdoch, but honestly not too much worth mentioning about him beyond this. Frank Castle, or the Punisher, is what Daredevil could be if he let go of his moral convictions. We discussed his origin already, but after the death of his family, he starts taking the fight to the mob, killing them en masse, something that Daredevil won't do, and he has his supporters, along with a version of justice that cuts the head off the crime organizations, which may rebuild, but only to add more people to his vengeance, something that it doesn't seem Punisher would really mind, despite his supposed convictions. After his talk with Daredevil early on, a talk that sees him express that he won't change his ways pretty much no matter what, and really doesn't want to either, he still sees sympathy for Matt, Karen, and Foggy, who try their best to get him off death row as they try to fathom what would lead him to this. Was it PTSD, past crime connections, or something else? But ultimately, the answer is exactly what it seems. Frank came back from protecting his country, and that country devoured him and his family.
Any lowlife, any maggot piece of shit that I put down, I did it because I liked it. Hell, I loved it.
Leaving nothing left but the soldier he was overseas, who now has a new target through organized crime. Of course, this is worsened when we learn that the DA was in on the crime the whole time, along with other issues, but yeah. At one point, he goes to jail and makes a loose pact with the Kingpin, one which leads to his freedom, but a verbal understanding that one day Kingpin and the Punisher will meet again, but on terms that are less friendly than some mutually beneficial jail kills and only a few sneaky attempts on Frank's life.
Next time I see you, only one of us walks away. Yes, of course. I'm counting on it.
After this, Frank finally breaks bad like Walter White, killing his former ally from the service, Colonel Ray Shover, before the Punisher, now fully Punisher, bails out a struggling Daredevil in his war with the Hand, promising more to come as he wanders back into the night and proving that he does want to defend other heroes, even if their versions of justice are very different. Elektra comes to town in this show. She was once Matt's lover back in his younger days, and like Matt, trained under Stick. She returns tracking strange activity by the hand in New York, something that pulls in Matt and pulls him further into his life as Daredevil, also cruelly causing Matt to ditch Karen. He's a total asshole in this season, honestly, but it's kind of what's needed for the arc. Elektra is torn. On one hand, Stick created her and molded her into a killer. Her sole purpose in life is to literally murder people. Daredevil says this is wrong, something she starts trying to come to grips with, though it isn't until near her death that she finally starts kind of respecting Matt's ways a bit more. She's the Black Sky, a prophesized messiah for the hand that will lead them to glory, though honestly what this entails and whether or not it actually gives her additional powers or if it's merely just a prophecy is totally unknown. Stick plans on murdering her to stop the Black Sky prophecy. Remember, in the first season he killed a literal child who was pegged to be the Black Sky. Elektra's pissed. Stick would attempt to do the same to her. The hand takes Elektra's body at the end of the show, following her death, which hints at more to come in the future for Elektra despite her death. Stick is obsessed with his long-professed war. He and Nobu are kind of two parallel evils, though Stick, I guess, more or less hopes to protect the world. But he looks to do that means by religiously following prophecies like the Black Sky. Killing kids, training kids, all under the assumption that he's correct in his assumptions. Trying to kill Elektra, who is effectively his daughter, when he thinks it's the only way to stop her from becoming the Black Sky, based mostly on rumors and rumblings. No idea if they were wrong about the kid in season 1, or if it was like passed to Elektra after he died. Was there multiple Black Skies? I don't know. Doesn't matter, I guess, at this point, but it's kind of the plot that we're presented here. Nobu is the show's definitive villain, from a certain point of view at least. Punisher, Elektra, and the Stick are also villains to some various degrees, though they each show angles on how Matt could take his crime fighting into a more effective, but also morally much more gray version of what he's currently doing. Nobu sends his hand ninjas to New York and starts stirring up a bit of a war with the Stick, running through murdering hospital workers, kidnapping innocents, including Karen at one point, and just doing anything to get a hold of Elektra. Nobu also despises Daredevil following his seemed demise during season 1 when he fought him half-cocked and got burned up. At the end of the show, he is decapitated by Stick, officially ending his reign of terror, though this is far from the end of the Hand's operations, which we'll continue to cover later on. Claire Temple is again trying to leave this superhero bullshit in the past, but it follows her once again. This time, she has her hospital attacked by hand ninjas who kill other workers and patients.
Temple! No! Lisa!
Something the hospital hopes to cover up, leading Claire to leave and strike out on her own, since she wouldn't be complacent in this kind of political bullshit when she just wants to save lives.
But just an FYI, it used to be a place where job number 1 was saving lives.
Wilson Fisk is the last seed planted. He isn't the focus of the season, but he works with the antagonist Punisher in jail and hopes to make him an asset in his power grab as he tries to start transitioning back out of jail, figuring he would eventually kill him, though after that failed, he tried buying him. The Punisher saw through this, and while Fisk agreed to help him escape jail as a means to kill his enemies on the outside, it was mutually agreed upon that when they meet again, it wouldn't end on such mutually beneficial terms. I like that they didn't cut this out of his character. The image of Kingpin looking at the white walls leading to his anger and showing his emptiness despite having everything he wants is so important if you watch season 1, something that despite a personnel switch wasn't lost upon the new creative team. There isn't much to it in this one because we really don't get a whole ton of Kingpin, but it does kind of continue to remind us about Kingpin, his motives, and how he feels for when he returns later on. So this is going to sound odd for someone who genuinely likes superhero stories and Star Wars and all sorts of action-heavy things, but I could pretty much give a shit less about the action. Well, okay, perhaps I give a tiny baby shit, but mostly I'm interested in the old hero-villain stories and their dynamics. I like seeing new stuff. So one thing that, especially in this Netflix series, doesn't factor in too much for me is the action. Now, I say all this because when it comes to Daredevil, the action is pretty much required to be peak. And if you are an action-first kind of person, you're in luck. Much more of this show orbits around action sequences, costumes, and fights, especially when you compare this season to Jessica Jones. The jump in fight scene quality is staggering. Plus, there's a whole lot of action scenes, including a new and improved hallway fight. Plenty of ninja battles and other scenes that I think will satisfy your fix if you're more of a casual, in-it-for-the-fights kind of person. Tonally, the show is dark, and really that stems from the broad strokes theme of defining justice and finding Daredevil's line. This show features 4 characters that are more or less vigilantes: Daredevil, Stick, Elektra, and Punisher. Each have their unique set of rules and values. Daredevil wants to stop crime with no killing and potentially stake out the root cause and help reform people through his defense work. Stick wants the evil hand destroyed and will kill anyone in his way of that goal, trying to preemptively kill people who may become threats in the future, like the original Black Sky, and Elektra when he thought she was Black Sky. Elektra has a similar code to Daredevil, but for the really bad, she'll kill them. She may even kill the less bad, but she's more in it for the vibes than Punisher or Stick. Punisher has a black and white, good and bad code that is very hard on crime. He'll murder anyone in his evil category.
I'm just trying to make a buck.
He, however, won't necessarily kill till they earn it in his eyes. Daredevil condemns Punisher, frequently criticizes him, but lightly tries to talk Elektra out of her path.
Everything you do out there in the streets, Red, it doesn't work. Did you know that?
Oh, and what you're doing is better?
What I do, I just do. It's out of necessity.
Our hero is morally confused and perhaps kind of a hypocrite, who also acts like an asshole to his friends, Karen and Foggy, putting Matt in a really dark position since Karen and Foggy are really the two that have been pulling him up to this point. I think it's a wonderful tone for a pretty good story, and I think it's important to kind of put Matt down this darker addiction angle that kind of makes him an asshole, which I think puts him in an interesting position for season 3. John Paisano returns from season 1 to compose the music, and it keeps the same vibe, pulling over very nicely this dark tone I talked about in season 1, and I thought it was well enough. I think the music here stays consistent and continues the musical continuity of this series. The show again has pretty good editing. The episodes are also more willing to shrink a bit, feeling a little less restrained to that 51-minute arbitrary restraint from the first season. But at 13 episodes with a length of approximately 48 to 50 minutes, you still start feeling the length quite a bit. I also feel the show sometimes jumps focus to focus. Matt especially more or less leaves the Punisher plot for the most part after he is incarcerated, and Elektra comes to town where she takes over the show with this war with the hand angle that I felt was perhaps better left for a future season, since I think there was so much more exploring you could do on the Punisher. I think you could have easily had Kingpin get out of jail and hire Elektra, bringing Stick in and having Punisher as another X Factor, and have told a much more clean story about Matt and his limits as a hero and his identity as a person, without having to kind of have two distinct parts of the season that feel more or less separate in the Punisher and Elektra plots. This show kind of feels like 50 great ideas thrown into a blender and dumped out as a paste. It's really good, but I can't help feel we could have had a more solid product if they just tightened up the focus and tied the main two plots together in a more meaningful way than just Punisher shows up at the end to snipe a couple guys. It would also make that moment where Punisher shows up in the finale feel so much more satisfying. I can't place the blame on the editing though, since this was how the show had to have been written, and the editors made some remarkable action sequences for a TV show, But yeah, I wish they tightened up the story a bit, and I could see ways where they perhaps could have done that. Cinematography was taken over by Martin Algren, who I think did a solid job. Some stuff here looks really good, but at the same time other stuff looks kind of bright and plain and kind of sanding off some of the rough edges of the first season and feeling more like a sterile and clean world, like the one the main Marvel Studios MCU projects take place in. It may be a small step down, but I'll be totally fair and admit that I still think it's pretty solid, especially for being an early streaming TV series. Karen does a cheesy end speech, and since she does it in place of the superhero, they thought they could get around it and like make it okay, but they really need to fucking stop with these cheesy speeches.
Others bloody the streets in the hope they can stop the tide, the crime, the cruelty, the disregard for human life all around them.
I almost turned it off in disgust. Like, imagine actually reading this in a newspaper, because she's like typing it out. Like, this is something she printed. These speeches suck. Like, please goddamn stop. They're not realistic. No one would say this crap. And honestly, it's just dumb. It's too dumb for this show, which actually had some decent arcs within it. Overall, the season is good. Like I said, so many good moments with the Daredevil character, and it brings Matt to new depths of despair and blurs the line between the hero and Matt with undeniable consequences. On the same note, though, I wish they did a better job integrating the Elektra plotline and the Punisher plotline, especially since Matt's character arc is totally parallel in both. Like, it would have been so much more effective if Punisher got wrapped into it a bit more. I just think the show loses the plot sometimes, and honestly, I think the Punisher plot is just so much more simple, concise, and honestly far more compelling to me than the ancient war with the hand, which I think this season could have nudged instead of pushing as hard as they did. Still, there's so much good stuff here that despite my urge to see this show restructured a bit, I still think there's so much amazing stuff in it that I can't really call it bad. I still think it's pretty solid. Daredevil Season 2 would lead into a third season, but before that, Daredevil returns for the MCU Netflix's Avengers equivalent in The Defenders.